Welcome everybody. Hello, greetings from Denver. I happen to be in Denver today, and glad to have you all here. So you see me, I'm in my hotel room. That's what you kind of see in the background. And happy to see you, Barry. It's great to have you here on Trainer Talk with us.
Yeah, it's a real honor to be here on the Trainer Talk. And I don't know, you're not in San Diego yet, Becca?
No, right now I'm in Denver.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So you're a little bit nearer to the Netherlands. And,
a little bit. An hour closer.
An hour closer. Okay. But I hope everybody who is listening at this moment to the Trainer Talk know where the Netherlands is.
Well, you might tell us.
It's that little country somewhere in the western of Europe, which is known for that most of its country is below sea level, with all the traditional site of windmills, but we don't have them actually anymore so much. So, but maybe a lot of people know have been in Amsterdam, as you have been, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And there's just all kinds of wonderful EFT things happening over there in the Netherlands, and some of that we're going to talk about. We're going to mostly talk about EFT and attachment and neuroscience, but some of that you know has come about from your work and the Creating Connection conference that you do there in the Netherlands.
Yes. Well, what do you want me to tell?
Well, I think people kind of know about it from being on the listserv, and maybe as we close the meeting, we can show a little bit about it, because we have kind of a trailer about Creating Connection. So maybe at the end of the meeting we can and close a little bit about that. But it just happened not that long ago, the most recent conference there, and you had all kinds of big names and.
Yeah, we had an incredible lineup of people. Actually, it was the second Creating Connections conference. And by the way, the origins of Creating Connections was during the summit in San Diego a couple of years ago. Because there, my colleague with whom I work a lot, here in the Netherlands, Jaap Kool, we were invited by you, as you remember probably, on the summit. And there we met for the first time Jim Cohen and Sue Johnson. And we heard, and maybe there are people here on the listening who also attended the summit. But Jim Cohen, in his talk to the audience, he made such an impression about what he was telling about neuroscience and the connection with of course, emotion-focused therapy, but also with therapy in general. We immediately, after the whole audience, it was completely silence. And he was a little bit joking. He was a young guy, but he made such an impression, and he got a standing ovation. And my colleague and we both had the idea, people in the Netherlands should hear him together with Sue. So at that moment, after his talk, we went to him and we asked him, hey, is something to come over to the Netherlands together with Sue? And they did. And at that moment, I asked also to Sue, hey Sue, because I already knew Sue Johnson a little bit. And at that moment, I asked Sue, hey Sue, who do you think should attend a conference? And she immediately told me, okay, that should be Phil Schaefer and Mario Michelingher. And I asked her, do you think you can get in contact with them? And she said yes. And that was the beginning of the first steps to the Creative Connections Conference. And now we are 4 years later. We had an amazing conference in 2011. With, of course, Phil Schaefer, Mario Michelingher, Sue Johnson, and Jim Cohen, and they did an outstanding presentation. But we had also Dan Siegel, and we had John Allen from the Menninger Institute, and he's mostly he's in mentalization-based treatment. So we made we made connections. We created connections between several paradigmas, and for us, and it's a growing, it's a little bit our vision, and also growing, that we had the idea we have to bring those different paradigmas to each other, and there should be a bridge between neuroscience, and especially the neuroscience and the theory on emotions and attachment theory all together. At that moment, we didn't know it was quite new in the world. We were a little bit naive because we thought, oh, they have done it everywhere. But we discovered we were really the first in the world to bring those top people, top presenters and researchers to each other. And what distinguished our conference from a lot of other conferences was that we offered them what we called a 2-day think tank, in which the presenters were offered a location somewhere in the Netherlands with all amenities, and undisturbed they could talk and discuss their work, and we tried to challenge them to get out, to think out of the box, out of their, because that's also their comfort zone, and we challenged them to come out of their comfort zone and talk to their other presenters and discuss it in sort of hope that they would create new insight, that they would create new connections. And actually that happened, because nowadays even John Allen, who didn't know anything about the work of Sue Johnson, is still in connection with Sue Johnson. Even Jim Cohen is talking and discussing a lot with John Allen, for instance. Now, and yeah, if you hear it by the list server, the Creative Connections, and I saw a couple of people who are here on the who are attending this trainer talk, like Isa Sarikpour and Ingeborg Wees, and maybe also others. I can't see them all yet, but they attended the Creative Connections 2 conference, and it was amazing. It was really amazing, and
you really have, Barry, been able to, with the conference, do what the conference says, creating connections, which of course is the EFT manual, creating connections, and that's really been great, the think tank and some of the things that are coming out of that. So let's focus a little bit. We have, as people signed up,
yes,
they sent us questions about attachment and neuroscience. So I'm going to say that we had a lot of questions, and we're kind of trying to respond to the themes of those questions, because we don't have time to really cover each and every question, and they really did group into some pretty specific things. So we'll try to respond to that, and so hopefully we do a good job, and we answer some of those questions. And then also, in addition to that, in addition to us just talking and trying to respond to some of those questions, we do have some tape that we want to show from the conference, where Sue is doing this really cool thing with Jim Cohen, where they're reviewing the John and Julia tape, and Sue's kind of giving her take on what she thinks she's doing, and Jim Cohen jumps in and says, from a neuroscience perspective, this is what I think is going on in the brain. So that's going to be a fun thing too.
It's called, we are going to talk about the latest on neuroscience in connection with, for instance, EFT. And although I'm not a neuroscience, I'm just a government licensed psychotherapist, and for almost 25 years in couple and family therapy. But what I read all the questions from the people who are listening, and when I was reading all those questions, and they're great questions, first of all, they're very good questions, and I'm really I can say there are some questions I really can't answer because I don't know. That's for it. But
there's some things we don't know yet, and I'm in the same position as you, even though I do, a workshop on attachment and neuroscience, and I think I'm, kind of up to date as much as I can be, that we are not neuroscientists, and we are distilling the literature and the research and the presentations from our how we've been educated as well, right? We're not the researchers, we're not the neuroscientists.
But when I read the two questions, Rebecca, there are two things, two aspects which struck me so much, and I think that's all about neuroscience, the connection between neuroscience and, for instance, EFT. And it comes back to the questions. And those things, you will later see it a little bit and hear it on I hope, in the piece of video you're going to show from the conference. And those things are that Jim Cohen gave back to Sue that what's very important in what's happening in therapy is that your right hemisphere, your right brain, is communicating, and you hope that it's going to communicate with the right brain of your clients. That's one of the things we can talk about. The other thing is, and Sue was...
and that's so much what Alan Shore talks about, right brain to right brain connection. And there's that other thing that we're doing neuroscience-wise, which we're slowing down from the limbic processing to the frontal lobe processing. We're making the connection that way, and we're making, this connection, right brain to right brain to right brain, in the relationship and the emotion connection.
In trying to help shaping for instance, the emotions, the core emotions of your client, and to help them to get words for them. Jim Cohen, he made a very, very beautiful remark. He told Sue, what you are doing at the moment is loaning your prefrontal cortex to your clients. That's what you're doing.
Right.
And if you really understand how neuroscience, how your brain is working, and I'm not a brain specialist, but if you try to understand, you immediately understand what's happening in your therapy room. For instance, when you try to help the hyperarousal, how you should say it, to help regulate the hyperarousal, to lower it, the arousal of your client. What you do is, what I, for instance, do is that I try to connect where the client is emotionally, even if he don't know, even if he don't have words for what's happening at the moment to him. And you tune in, and what we do is not trying to have a reasonable talk, because that's not possible. You have to calm down, you have to stabilize, and how are you going to do it? It's just, I always make the connection also to my clients. I make references to how they get along with their children, because that's the best way they recognize what we also do, what's happening with us inside, and what's happening with us in between of us. You're not trying to calm down a kid by talking, okay, let's be reasonable. No, what you do is, okay, come here, be with me, I will be with you, and you don't use that much words in the beginning, but you try to be very, very near to someone, and you go to try to give some little words which hopefully connects where and helps to calm down your client when he is in a hyperarousal. That's what we do in a state of hyperarousal. And then you see very little signs of that the hyperarousal diminishes. And at the moment when it diminishes, you give even more words. The empathic conjecture, you go very close to the emotions of the client in a way that his prefrontal cortex is accessible again for the client. And I guess not only therapists know this. I guess a lot of people who work, for instance, in crisis situations. For instance, I've been in the past, I've been a paramedic. And it was almost 25 years ago. And for the first time, when I heard from the theory, I heard about Alan Shaw, what he was talking, and Jim Cohen, I immediately recognized what I was already doing 25 years, 30 years ago when I was a paramedic on an ambulance, like George Fowler. Because we both know very good what's happening when a client is under a situation of extreme stress, hyperarousal. You don't start talking. You just hold them like we hold children. You hold them, you connect with them, you sit down with them till the moment that you really bodily feel that they calm down. Because it doesn't have any sense to talk to someone. And in a matter of fact, the same happens in your therapy room. The only thing is, we're not allowed anymore to hold physically our clients. And that's a pity, because I'm a male nurse, and I was used in the past, when I was working in a hospital, to hold people who are so frightened. So frightened that you even can, one of the people tried to had a question to the polyvagal therapy of Porges. But I know.
Right. Yeah, it's coming up right now, actually, and it came up in the class.
Yeah, but to me it seems when I read the theory of and it's a complicated theory. It's even maybe it has to do with the way Stephen Porges writes, but it's a complicated therapy to understand. But if you have any experience with a state of where a human being is under such a threat and he can't escape, he really comes to a standstill, he really freezes, he shut down all his, all his mechanism to survive. And for me as a paramedic, I have been in such situations that people are so frightened, and we know that also from the literature. For instance, think about the soldiers with shell shock. They shut down. And I guess that's exactly what Stephen Porges means. And the better you are attached, the better, when you're safely attached, there's a real connection that you are able to regulate your arousal. And he's talking about the heartbeat rate, the variability about the heart rate. I know that because I put a lot of my experience also from my former job. I know that because we put them on a what we call electrocardiogram in the ambulance, and you could see people who really are frightened or not, or who could handle their frightness in a situation where there is a real threat on their lives and they can't escape it. So and what you do, you really loan your prefrontal cortex to calm down the people. And it's amazing. And I was in the, can I go ahead? Or do I talk too much? Because, or do I talk too much? You just say it. But
yeah, certainly.
It was, unfortunately, Alan Shore was not on the conference in the Netherlands, and we have invited him together with Stephen Porch and Sue Carter for the 2015, and they're all coming, probably also with Dan Siegel. But what, for instance, Alan Shore makes very clear is the importance of being present, of being present. And he made, and I don't know for sure, but being present is, when I heard him, almost synonym with being mindful. Being mindful to yourself and being mindful to your clients.
Yes.
If you are mindful to your clients, you are completely present there and everything what comes from your clients. And you accept it, you receive it unconditionally. Then we have Rogers again coming across the corner. Unconditional regard. You're there, you accept it, and you really try to understand. That's what we do in EFT. Help me understand.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we do that as the therapist to help. That helps that regulation. But that's also what we're looking to help build in stage 2 with our clients, to be able to have that presence. I think that mindfulness.
Yep.
You know, one of Dan Siegel's definition of mindfulness is paying attention to intention. So that very much keeps us in the attachment space and noticing and being aware of dysregulation, and that awareness, when it's joined, when we're attuning to it, when we're mindful to what's happening in our clients, as we lighten their neurological load from co-regulating with them, that they can increase that mindfulness as well. That their clarity of intention, it helps them to send a clear signal, a clear coherent signal, as Sue would say.
Then you immediately recognize the importance of being mindful and also be acceptable to your own. Am I able? That's my experience. Are you able to receive, to be mindful? Then you also have to be mindful to your own raw spots. Because if always in every therapy, and it was already for me clear before I did EFT, all your clients, without knowing that they don't know it, but they can touch your raw spots. And if you can't regulate them, your own raw spots, your own arousal when they are touched, you immediately are not mindful anymore.
So, right. So one of the things, you're answering one of the questions right now as you're talking, Barry, because one of the kind of themes that we saw was, when we know more about neuroscience, how do we utilize it in EFT therapy? And it's not so much that we're going to get up on the whiteboard and describe different parts of the brain or, describe neuroscience. It's really more that as we understand that, it can increase our compassion for ourselves, for our clients. It can increase our ability to stay in the room, to stay attuned. There may be times, especially in trauma, where we may do some more psychoeducation, what Sue calls bottom-up psychoed, to try to help them and to normalize their experience. Like, of course what you're feeling right now makes all kinds of sense. So I think that the question how we utilize the neuroscience is really I think what it does is support what we're doing in EFT. I mean, that's how I utilize it. I don't know how you utilize it, but it helps increase my compassion, my understanding, my ability to stay attuned in the room.
From the bottom up, that's what you told me, I guess. But what sometimes I think this is also mentalizing to someone who is in a state of hyperarousal. And if you see the brain, the layerness of the brain, where is somebody who is in a state of hyperarousal? He's mostly, when you see it, what Jim Cohen told us, he's back to his limbic system, or evil to his reptile brain. And in that state, it's not possible for someone to he hasn't access to his prefrontal cortex. So what we do, like still face, like what we do is we offer words, not too many, so somebody feels a kind of structure, a kind of safety. Oh, you're holding, exactly, that's the word. You're holding a client at that moment.
And holding, yeah.
And it is really important that in trying to offer that holding, you slice it very, very thin, because the brain is not able to receive it, because what you're trying to do, you offer what Jim Cohen said, you offer your prefrontal cortex to a client in a state of hyperarousal. So you have to be very, very calm, to tune in, very compassionate to your client, to understand. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, I got a man here in my practice. Nobody can see it. Somebody who are here on the list, they know the room in my practice. But I get a couple, and that man, it was the first session, and he was so angry, and his wife already told me. She tried to regulate him. Calm down, calm down, calm down. And every time she was trying to tell him, calm down, calm down. And he was telling, I can shut everybody who's coming in the way. So aggressive. And, you know, that's what I mean. When I mean you have to be compassionate, you have to handle, you should be able to regulate your own arousal. Because I easily could felt very threatened by that guy. And actually, my heartbeat was also going up and down. Because anyway, and I know I could also shut down. I feel it, but I know this situation because I've worked so long as a paramedic and the crisis mental health care where I was threatened, etc. So I felt it, but at the same time I felt also something. This guy must be so desperate. I don't know why, or if and whereabout, but it feels he's so desperate. And it gave back. You're trying to make me clear, you're so desperate at this moment, here in this room, and you're so desperate, nobody will hear how desperate you are. And he immediately calmed down. You're really the first who doesn't see only that I'm aggressive, but I'm desperate, I have lost everything. So that guy was telling about himself. He was really in a situation where he really felt not only threatened, but that he didn't also had the ability to escape from the threat. And from the neuroscience perspective, there was also a question: what about you mostly have fight or flight? This guy tried to fight, but he couldn't do it anymore. He was even afraid about being aggressive, that he couldn't control his aggressiveness anymore, and he really would shoot down someone, but actually he was desperate, and he was freezed. He was really desperate and anxious. He would completely, how you call it, like, well, how is Stephen Porges called, that you come to a complete shutdown, and then you are really vulnerable, because then everybody can do with you what they want to do with you. And if you have ever been in such a state, that's enormous. That's really enormous. So, yeah, that's what I want to tell about those states. Okay?
Right. So, yeah, that's really helpful. There's a couple questions here about, you know, you started to mention fight, flight, going into fight, the that immediate amygdala limbic response that happens. And, you know, sometimes there's a more nuanced, a more broad explanation that happens. I think Jim Cohen does a really nice job. At the first summit, you know, that you mentioned, he put up this big scattergram of all the parts of the brain, you know, that come online under threat. You know, the motor response, the hyperarousal, the getting ready to run, you know, all of the kind of the different systems that get on board for when we're involved in threat, in that threat response. And I don't know, you know, he does a really nice job of explaining that, I think, in that presentation, which is, if people are really interested in, you know, the actual brain structures that are coming there, rather than, because we kind of summarize it as, okay, there's that response, and there are, you know, like 20 other structures involved in the brain that kick in to that response.
Absolutely.
If, you know, if someone's interested in knowing all of those particulars, then Jim Cohen's work is really great for that. They might purchase that summit review, or read in the most recent Handbook of Attachment. He has a nice new chapter in that book where he describes some of that. But really kind of does, one of the things that he does describe that's, you know, was kind of new to here at creating connections, and we probably should shift to the video. I'm not sure if it's on this bit of video that we're going to show.
Yeah.
But he does describe something that was really new for me to hear about the homeostasis of the brain with the blood flow, right? That there's only so much blood that can be in the brain, and so the reason for, you know, shutting down different processes and moving into the body into fight, for example, or moving the body into freeze, has to do with really the brain would blow up if there's not regulation. So shutting down to prevent too much blood flow into the brain, or
you explain it very good. That's what he told in his presentation, the homeostasis. And not only I read in preparing this trainer talk, I read some chapters of Alan Shore and Stephen Porges, and they all emphasize the evolutionary building of our brains, and that it's I call it evolutionary because it's probably not only restricted to us mammals. You see it everywhere in the evolution of animals. Most animals, you see that there is a kind of homeostasis, especially in situations where there is a threat on life. They think about the polyvagal theory. What explains Stephen Porges. he gives the examples of animals who completely come to a standstill, animals who lay down as if they are dead. So a snake goes along it, and it's not, what do you call it? He's not bitten anymore. That's the way to help regulate internally the threat. And how does he do it? When they research it, even in those animals, you see a different balance, homeostase, of the blood volume. The blood is much more to the parts of mostly the brain, which helps to survive an animal. So also us as human beings in handling a threat situation. It seems it's an evolutionary mechanism, and I guess
so when I'm kind of there in overwhelm, I don't have access to words, to my prefrontal cortex. Too much is happening in the brain and too much blood flow from the alarm going off. And so that freeze or flight, that shutdown.
Yeah, I don't know whether, Rebecca, if you ever have been in a situation of being threatened, or that you were in a longer state of hyperarousal. Because of my background, my work, I know that, because what I sensed is that you're almost hyper alert on more on a vegetative level of seeing, hearing. Your ear is sharper, your sight is sharper to pick up things which have the meaning, because that's it, which has the meaning of a threat of your life. You should ask me at such a moment, okay, and now we're going to read a chapter of Alan Shaw's book. You can't. You really can't. And that's what I talked about with Jim Cohen. You can't because there is not much blood enough for your cortex to read the books. That's what he's telling. Because the threat is much more, it needs much more blood. And that makes that he's talking about the homeostasis. But it's encompassed in his whole theory, in his whole social baseline theory, that every time, or what's the homeostasis? Our brain is always busy to stay in a kind of calm down modus. It's all, and our brain is every time perceiving without knowing it. It's an unconscious level. We're always perceiving if there is a threat to our lives, and there you have the connection with attachment. If you're perceiving on unconsciousness, maybe on the level of the encephalon and a limbic system, if you're perceiving threats to our lives, what do we need? And what we're doing is we try to connect to other people, because this costs so much energy on your brain level that we loan some energy from other people, because that helps us to downregulate our arousal. And I always say, here in the Netherlands, I live here in the border, near the border of Belgium, and we have what we call a nuclear reactor nearby. And I always tell people, listen, if this nuclear reaction is going to explode, one day later, all the people will sit in the church, and not that they are religious again. No, only they connect together, because then they are better able to handle the threat and the anxiety of, that's what we're doing. And that's what you look look at the internet, go to YouTube, go click some words in it, and you see everywhere pictures, you see everywhere YouTube films where people get together for connection, of want to connect because of regulating their arousal. They calm down. All our language is full of it. So that's what I think. When I started with EFT, for me, it was not completely new. No, it got words, which were already there. I was already doing it for years. And I felt also what a lot of people has experienced, EFT is not new. It's inside of us. The attachment is inside of us. But we only have lost the connection with it, also because of lots of years of that the emphasis was much on our conditions. And that was also what Alan Shore is writing. I discovered in a book, and I was really enthusiastic about what I was reading, because he told we are shifting from an era from cognitives to emotions, and maybe it's going on. And that's what I see. That's why EFT is making such a huge progress. People recognize immediately what you are doing in EFT. That's the beautiful thing of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, it hits home, right, to us and to our clients. So let's watch some of this tape, Barry, where Sue is, I'll just lead in a little bit. Sue and Jim, this is at the conference, it's one of the workshops, and they are reviewing the Engaging Withdrawer tape, where Sue's working with John and Julia, and really doing some step 3 and step 4 with John.
Yep.
And what we've done is pulled up a place where they're discussing what she's doing. We're not really leading into showing what she's doing, but where they're discussing about it.
Can I start?
Let's show this first part, and maybe you can just, I'll start it and you can stop it at the right spot there, okay?
Oh yeah, 8:40.
You can start it.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Easy. So there's a trade-off when you're doing things in this very implicit procedure.
Yeah.
I'm going to back it up just a little bit. It skipped.
Easy. So there's a trade-off when you're doing things in this very implicit procedural way. It's very easy. You don't have to put a lot of thought into it, and it just sort of happens on its own. But it's very rigid. It's very inflexible. So it's very hard to change with that particular channel. If you're going to change it, and this is one of the great advantages, in a way, it also can be a disadvantage, of being a human. We have, and I talked about this yesterday, this marvelous prefrontal cortex. So what's the trade-off with the prefrontal cortex? The prefrontal cortex allows for tremendous flexibility in our responding. Okay? But the trade-off is that it's not very efficient. It's slow. It's effortful.
And emotion is fast.
And emotion is fast. Emotion is very fast. So Sue has a very difficult problem. How do I change one fast process, fast and efficient process, into another fast and efficient process? Right? How do I do that?
That's why couples therapy is hard. Okay.
Yeah, this is very difficult, as many of you know. So, well, there's really not many doorways from one fast implicit process to another without some explicit processing, some effortful processing. It's that trade-off again. And what you see that in action right here. Now, when people are processing things explicitly, when they're making use of that lovely executive capacity that they have, it's exhausting. They don't want to do it for long periods of time. But part of the reason that it's exhausting is that it implies all of these other processes. As Matt Lieberman and other people have shown, when you name something, when you take a step back from the implicit process that you're engaging in, you necessarily slow down. You're engaging a massive piece of neural real estate that is allowing you to hold lots of observations in working memory. Okay? Part of what happens when you do that is that you inhibit other processes that you might call affective or emotional, or other kinds of. You literally, so put a hold on that so that you can put these things. You can sort of put these things into your processing buffer in your head, and view things from different angles. Talk about them analytically. Think abstractly. So there's something about what Sue is doing at this point that's inherently regulatory. She's helping to regulate them. So, and in two ways. If you think I'm wrong, please speak up.
Okay.
She'll throw something at me.
Okay.
She's not only regulating the affect itself by coaching him through the process of looking more objectively at the dance that he engages in with his wife, but she's also helping take up some of the slack. It's hard, it's effortful. Part of the reason that they're in therapy is because he doesn't spend a lot of time doing this at home. He goes into the garage, and once he's exhausted, and because going into the garage is very much easier. One of the ways that you can regulate affect, as any toddler knows, since this is what they typically do, is they distract. You can distract yourself. This is a self-regulatory strategy that James Gross has taught us is not that costly.
And actually, he actually talks about this in a minute. He says, I don't want to feel this. I'm going to distract myself.
Go somewhere else and distract myself. That is much easier than going, I wonder, let me think about this for a moment and analyze it. That's exhausting. Pretty soon he's going to want to have a drink or go outside, and then if she won't let him, he'll, stop it. And that's their process.
Right.
So part of what Sue's doing is helping him think, distributing the prefrontal processing across two brains.
Oh, okay. I never think of that, all right?
Yeah, she doesn't think of that, right? See? Aren't you happy that we...
Yeah, well, okay. What I think of is I'm trying to get him into his visceral experience, embodied or whatever we call it. I'm trying to get him into his actual affective experience. But what I'm also trying to do is support him, hold him, and order that experience at the same time, so it doesn't get overwhelming. I'm trying to order it, which is why I repeat things, and I use his words. Dan had a lovely word for it. I call it handles when he uses particular words, and I pick them up. And I can't remember what you called it, but there's grabbing phrases that he uses to capture his experience. I'll go back to them, and I'm trying to order it at the same time as the process starts to, because I don't want him overwhelmed. I want him in his emotion and at a working distance from his emotion.
And when you say order it, at this point, are you talking about just making sure that we have an accurate picture of what the process is? Or are you talking also about sort of shaping it?
Both, but I'm also talking about keeping him with me, keeping it tolerable for him. So putting it into, because Lieberman says when you use words, so if you name your experience,
right.
And I say to you, oh yes, I can understand that, and it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And right here, right now, it's not a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe in your head, but right here with me right now, it's perfectly logical and understandable, and here I am, and I'm going to slow my voice down as well, which is what Dan also, I was watching him. Yeah. I'm going to slow my voice down and go soft with you, because then I hold you with my voice. So right here, right now, your fear is not a catastrophe.
So there's safety. I mean, one of the time, John Gottman taught me about how couples get into these processes that are like wheels within wheels within wheels, where there are multiple processes, and then there's another process, and then there's another process sort of wrapped around there. And so creating that safety starts removing other processes. So you create space to process other things, to think more accurately, but then you also provide a little bit of assistance with the thinking itself. So this is part of what happens in therapy, right? It's part of one of the reasons that therapy can really help people initially.
Okay,
but you still have this tremendously difficult goal ahead of you, which is to turn that into a new automatic process.
Okay, so let's look some more.
Okay. It's such a beautiful piece of their presentation, because Jim, he makes it so clear what Sue is doing. And Sue was searching for the word of then hugs, and then hugs. It was also on the chat box here. I saw it. But what she is doing, you are co-regulating your client back to his emotions in a way that he is not overwhelmed by him, and that he gets words for it very slowly, and that makes it always so very difficult for us EFT therapists when we try to slow down, because what you're doing is you bring back people into contact with their emotions, and that's really, really frightening. And the only thing is exactly what Sue does. And when also in my therapy my voice lowers and the message is, I'll be with you. I really be with you. And we both can handle this extremely fearful situation where you yet are when you face the dragon in its eyes. I will be with you, and together you can handle it. And you give words for it. I will. Exactly. Exactly. And at the end, you were able to do it.
I'm okay. You're okay. We're going to be okay. It's all right.
Because you never thought you were able to have a little bit contact with this raw spot inside of you, which is always hiding in the shadow of your existence. And that's what we're doing. So this is, Jim is, it's a fabulous how he's explaining it. Also from the neuroscience perspective. And I started this talk, you're really at that moment loaning your prefrontal cortex to your client, but you're only able to loan your prefrontal cortex, in my opinion, if you're able to regulate your own arousal. Because otherwise you shut down as a therapist to your clients. And that's what I guess you too, we see them often in supervision that therapists, and not only EFT therapists, they find it so difficult, for instance, to go into the emotion of aggression. Even much more as going into the emotion of fear. Aggression is, even a lot of therapists feel themselves, without knowing it, but that's supervision for and learning therapy, they feel threatened. And what you see what they're doing, they go to the frontal cortex and they become cognitive. They're going to talk about the emotions instead of going into the emotions. And I'm sure that's my experience. You really, I think what we are doing yet in EFT, those dig-ins, where the person of the therapist is the focus of, and to get in contact with your own experiences, your own attachment experiences, and how they affect your relationship, and the way you're making a connection to your clients, that influence of it. I think that's a great thing which is EFT doing at the moment to the therapist, to be able to be compassionate and mindful to their clients. Because that's what we want to as a therapist when we are threatened, when we feel very alone.
Yep. It's also so much, Barry, why having a community, either a local community and a worldwide community, helps us. Like we hold each other, so we're less reactive in our own sessions. We feel held and attuned and understood, and our problems are important, and you know, the difficulties we have in sessions important. And that helps hold us so we're not so triggered in session, right? It's us working with our own neuro system, actually, as we let ourselves have community. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's watch. There's another piece where we're talking, where there's this conversation about how the brain works as a prediction machine. Let's just go forward to that in relation to time, and then we want to show where people can get more information and learn a little bit more. So I know some people are getting ready to leave. And
okay, great.
Attachment styles and the way that they can interfere with different processes, social processes, and the way that some of the stuff I'll be talking about tomorrow. One of the ways to understand the human brain, it just writ large, what is a brain trying to do most of the time? The brain is trying to predict what's going to happen next. It's a prediction machine. And it follows what we'd call Bayesian rules of inference. And it's a fancy way of saying it uses past experience to predict future experience. So one of the things that we've been talking about is how being alone, being completely rock bottom, hitting ground zero, being financially strapped, as he brings in, is really, really scary. But one of the things that I keep thinking is even scarier is letting down your defenses, ceasing to protect yourself because you think that someone is going to be there to help you, and then they're actually not. And that creates a dilemma. It's expressed in all kinds of places, in game theory, prisoner's dilemma, all of these kinds of things. It's a dilemma because you don't know for sure whether someone's going to be there for you.
Right.
That creates all of these strategies that Phil and Mario have been teaching us all about, and that many others have taught us about. All these strategies for trying to increase your safety. You know, and sometimes it's better to depend on yourself. If you really predict from past experience that the future is going to be a future where there isn't going to be someone there for you, then the wisest course of action, not just in some vague, abstract psychological theory sense, but the wisest course of action in actual fact is to depend on yourself so that you at least have some defenses running so that you don't wind up hitting the rock bottom.
Right.
And that's what you're up against here, because it's really about changing those predictions.
Yes, and his prediction is, if I reach out to you, I don't want to feel this feeling, I don't want to put this stuff together, so I'm going to tell how you clever therapist, you're so clever, because then you'll stop talking to me about this, right? Not a chance, okay. Mm-hmm. But he's going on, and basically what he's saying is, I don't want to feel the feeling, I don't want to risk, and I don't want to talk to you about it because you'll despise me. That's what he's saying, right? And I want you to notice that part of what the EFT therapist does is titrate risk. So this man, I'm saying, could you please take a risk in the dance, change the dance with this new experience of feeling afraid rather than numbed out or angry. Please change the dance. Dance, listening to the music of fear. Show her your fear. And he says, no, I don't want to do it. So he's blocked. So an EFT therapist will go with that block and slice it thinner. I know where I'm going. Where I'm going to go is, if you don't want to risk that much, because it's too much, risk telling her how you can't do it because you're afraid.
Risk this much.
Yes,
yeah.
Risk that much. Yes. But if I turn to you and start to tell you, I can't tell you this because I'm afraid that you'll despise me, what am I doing? I'm risking. But I'm risking less. So we call that slicing it thinner. So when somebody says, no, I don't want to tell my partner this, we say, that's so hard to do. Yes, it is hard. You're right. I hear your fear. Here's your fear. Can you tell your partner, I can't risk telling you this? So you slice it thinner, but you still ask the client to take the new experience and turn it into a new signal, even if the signal is a small call, not a big call.
Okay.
Okay, Barry, I'm going to shift to this other view here. That's so exciting, right? I mean, I loved watching the tape, and that's available for people to purchase that tape to learn a little bit more. And I'm going to put this link over here so you guys can see the link in the web box there. You can highlight
put it also on the list server,
creating connections to, and that will take you to the purchase page for the DVDs of the conference.
DVD, as I have heard, with all the presentations, with all the slides, with all the power presentations, even as you have seen with pieces of video of the presenters, and it gives you also a kind of impression of the atmosphere of this 3-day conference. And of course, it's also a kind of invitation. Come in 2015 to the next Creating Connection 3, because we are really working hard on it, that it will be even more amazing, outstanding, and very distinguishing. Yeah.
And one of the questions are who are the attachment neuroscience researchers, and you answered that earlier, not specifically, but you said these are who we have coming, and those are kind of the foremost researchers right now, right?
His wife, they're coming together. Alan Shore is coming, Dan Siegel is coming, and we have a lot more of surprises, and that makes it. And again, the mission is what we do today with this trainer talk: create connections between our brain and our clients, to make connections to each other. And that's what I think. It's one of the biggest things which is coming up, is what's happening between us, and right at this moment when we are looking to each other, we are doing a lot. And I think the insight of that will help us even more what's happening in our therapy room and what's really working. Because that's also an economic principle which is very important nowadays, even in the Netherlands, that we know how, and being present to each other, it's very simple and very, and it doesn't cost anything. But it's difficult. Okay.
And very hard when you're triggered. Okay, Barry, it's been delightful to have you on. All right, it's been delightful to have you here and to answer some of these questions. I know there's a lot more. We maybe should do it again at some point in the future. I think it's great that ICEF supports us doing these trainer talks for ICEF members, and appreciate you all joining on and being here with us. And check out those links. I've got the Creating Connections there, where you can buy the whole conference package, Barry, that you're talking about. Jim Cohen, if you want to get his original talk at the summit that you were talking about, where you first met him, there's a link for that. And then if any of you are interested in joining me, watching other EFT trainers actually do it, then the in-session is there as well. So just in closing, shall we, we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to sign off because I have to get someplace else. But I'm going to, any of you that want to stay and play for a minute,
yes.
I'll play this Creating Connection.
Thank you very much, and thank you all who are in the chat box from New Zealand.
Your little commercial, I guess, about get a feel of what's happening over there.
As well.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you very
so much for being on.
Look at the trial of the DVD. There are little Dutch words on it, but it will give you an impression. Thank you, Becca, and we will see each other. Bye-bye. See you soon. Bye-bye.
We know how not just to deal with symptoms, but to build more secure bonds
and it can be scientifically based. We don't have to guess and have a roadmap for loving connection or even base it on theory. We can actually base it on science.
Ik heb heel veel aan haar zienswijze en ik wilde haar zo graag een keer live zien. En gisteren was dat mogelijk.
Really important message, which is that the world can change.
Wat ik het leukst vond van dit congres tot nu toe, is om heel veel collega's weer te ontmoeten en te zien en daarmee te spreken. En te horen waar zij mee bezig zijn in hun dagelijkse praktijk en hoe de EFT en alles wat daarmee samenhangt hen beïnvloedt.
Attachment styles, different ways of interaction, whether you trust people or not, the effects of trauma, all of these things come down to this.
I'm not privileging, I'm not focusing on only the problems, I'm focusing on the child as a person.
Ja, ik vind het fantastisch zoals die kinderen die zo getraumatiseerd zijn kan bewegen om daar iets over te vertellen en zeg maar ter plekke daarvan te helen.
You cannot rely on what you see, but you must relate what you see to something you don't see. Mental causes.
Dit is natuurlijk de plaats bij uitstek om heel fundamenteel te kijken hoe je mensen dichter bij elkaar kan brengen. Je hebt het stukje van het wetenschappelijk onderzoek tot een stukje praktische therapeutische invalshoeken, hoe je kan aanpakken. Dus dat is echt een feest om mee te maken.
Therapy, it's about mentalizing them, making them feel that we are there with them. And it's not what we teach them that may be the most relevant, but that their capacity for learning from social situations between the times that we see them has increased.
Ik ga nu proberen om ietsje meer te begrijpen van de invloed van de relatie, wat de relatie doet met onze hersenen en omgekeerd.
So we have to help couples learn how to scan the horizon for what your partner is doing right, not what your partner is doing wrong.
I'm touched. And inspired and in awe about what we've just experienced in the audience.